Good afternoon. You join us on Likeable Science here on ThinkTech Hawaii, broadcasting from the ThinkTech studios in Pioneer Plaza. Welcome to Likeable Science, where we endeavor each week to show you how much fun science is, and that science is really an enjoyable and vital part of everyone's life, not something to be feared or shunned, something to be reveled in and played with. So to help me in that exploration today, I have with me Dr. Rachel Sprague. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you very much.
Rachel is the Hawaiian monk seal recovery coordinator for the NOAA Marine Fisheries Service. So she is responsible for organizing the, I guess you could say that the care of, in some sense, the care of the monk seals all across Hawaii. And Rachel has a great deal of valuable experience. She originally got her undergraduate degree at Bowdoin College in Maine, and then her doctorate in fish and wildlife biology from the University of Montana. She has worked for a number of years on a wide variety of different projects. You worked first on albatrosses, and then later on loggerhead shrikes, and but something eventually led you on into seals, right? And now she essentially coordinates between NOAA and other NGOs and the public and interested stakeholders of all sorts, types, and varieties, and tries to keep everyone on the same page about helping us coexist pleasantly and productively with the two, I'm not saying the two native Hawaiian mammals, right?
Exactly.
The other being a bat.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, glad to see that. So, how did you end up after sort of wandering through these these bird populations? How did you end up studying seals?
Well, I was always interested in wildlife biology, and birds was what I studied for a long time. But throughout that, I was interested in in animal behavior and physiology and ecology. And the loggerhead shrike I worked on was an endemic and endangered subspecies, and so my experience there working on endangered species recovery. And then my kind of prior experience working on albatross in Hawaii kind of combined and turned into interest in the recovery program for Hawaiian monk seals.
Oh, excellent. And so the seals sort of need help, right? There's a relatively small population of them, a few hundred at this point.
Well, so yeah, they're one of the two most endangered seals in the world. The other being the Mediterranean monk seal. Hawaiian monk seals right now have about 1,100 individuals left in the world. About somewhere between 150, 250 are in the main Hawaiian Islands.
Right, and then the other one's up in the northwest
Yes.
Hawaiian Islands. Right?
Yep, the remaining populations
Right.
in the northwestern.
And so. You must get this question all the time, but sort of why should people care? I mean, what does a seal do for me, this man on the street,
Well, I mean, at some point you could sort of ask that about any animal, really. And to us, they're a part of Hawaii's marine ecosystem, and you'd like to think that there's not going to be a species that disappears on our watch because of us.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, and then being more or less an apex predator, if you remove them, clearly the ecology will change. Things that they used to eat will.
Right, and so you're right. They're a top predator. They are a generalist predator, so they eat kind of across the ecosystem. And honestly, I think we're not entirely sure what would happen if they disappeared or if sharks disappeared. It would be probably somewhat similar effects, and that's a little bit of what's scary, is that you can say, well, I'm not sure what this species does or what this species does, but at some point you start discounting so many things that it's like a Jenga tower. You're pulling out little pieces, and you don't know what's going to be the one you pull out, and the whole thing falls. So,
right, yeah. I had a coral person on earlier talking about what happens when the coral falls. Of course, that's pulling out the bottom of the tower.
Right.
You know perfectly well
that's just going right for the bottom. Yeah.
Everything's gonna. So most of our viewers have probably seen a monk seal too. Probably like what our first photo might show here, which is sort of the way people would tend to see a seal. Right? Is it's already roped off. It's just this big lump lying on the sand.
Yep, in the main Hawaiian Islands,
right.
You see them on the beaches like that.
And so, why are they there? Why are they choosing to be on our beaches, as it were?
Well, monk seals, I mean, they're a marine mammal,
right.
So they spend a good portion of their lives in the ocean while they're foraging, but while they're doing that, they're expending a lot of energy, and so they're coming up on the beaches to rest, and they're coming up on the beaches to have their pups. They can't do either of those things in the ocean. So when they're coming up on land, it's a natural part, and they're just coming up to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so these are endangered. Let's see. I think we have a graphic maybe that will show something about the population of the seals coming up next. And right. So here is the showing. This is numbers on found over the course of a year on each island or something?
Yeah, so that's the number of individuals we identify over the course of a year on each island. Some of those are double counted because we have quite a few seals that will say like, Kauai and Oahu or Oahu and the Big Island. And so, yeah, so some of those are double counted, but that's about how many we'll see on each island over a year.
And the trend clearly is that more of them are in the Northwest, which makes sense because that's more of their sort of their real authentic range in some sense, right?
Well, I would say maybe historic,
okay.
So they were probably at some point found throughout all of the islands. Okay. They were likely pushed out of the main Hawaiian Islands either through disturbance or actual hunting by the early Hawaiians that first showed up. It'd be kind of hard to blame people for showing up very large animals that don't really move lying on the beach. And it is only maybe within the last 25 years that we're starting to see them again in the main Hawaiian Islands. And so yes, it has sort of been a slow migration from the Northwest.
All right, so they're gradually repopulating. But it looked like Molokai was sort of the hot spot there in a sense.
Yeah, Molokai has a couple, Kalapapa on the peninsula and La'au Point. They get a lot of visits of seals. I don't know that the the standing population is higher than the surrounding islands, but there's definitely a lot of seals that like to at least stop through Molokai.
And the problem is sort of what's happening right to the populations right now, and I think our next image might show some trends in seal populations. And because the population is declining, right?
Yeah, so this is looking at the number of seals in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, which is where the bulk of the population is, over the last 10 years. And so you can see it dropping from about 1,150. Now, today, we're looking at around 900 individuals.
Right. And it sort of looks like it might be tailing out there, but is that real or is that just...
It's hard to say. Yeah, the decline has slowed in the last couple of years, but I wouldn't say we're out of the woods yet.
Okay. And then I think we've got another, let's see, do we have, no, we don't, that's later on here. So, so they're coming on out basically, you say, essentially to bask largely, and to give birth, and to, I noticed one of the pictures here shows them molting.
Yes. Yes, so that's the other, so resting, pupping, and molting, and this is looking at a seal. They don't shed hair like you or I or a dog. They shed all of their fur and an entire layer of skin. They call it a catastrophic molt once a year, and so it takes literally a lot of energy. We've found from studies in captive animals of metabolic energy, and so they pretty much stay on shore for about 2 weeks while they're shedding their fur. It looks incredibly uncomfortable.
Right, now it looks, and you can see that it makes sense. In the water, it probably wouldn't come off nearly as neatly,
Yeah, we get a lot of calls of dead, rotting seals around that time.
So they start to move.
And then they move.
They're zombie seals, clearly.
That's right.
And let's see, I think the next photo maybe shows one pupping.
So that's a very young pup. They are black when they're first born with its mom.
And again, one understands that as a visitor, you don't want to mess with a female animal who weighs 200 or 300 pounds who's just given birth. She might be understandably irritated and protective.
Yes, the moms actually tend to be more around the 4 to 500 pound range because they gain a lot of weight and then nurse their pup for 6 weeks while not eating. So they lose an incredible amount of weight during that time. The pup goes from about 35 to 175 pounds in 6 weeks, and then she stops cold turkey and weans them. So the moms are quite protective, and as much as you would not want to mess with a normal seal, messing or going anywhere near a mom and pup is not something you want to be doing.
And so that brings us to the other point is people find these young seals that are abandoned right on the shore, and it's basically the mom, because of their sort of the way they wean, they take good care of the pup up to one day when the mom basically decides, Junior's ready, and then she just disappears, basically, and may not come back or may only come back once or twice.
Yep, exactly. So she'll, stays as long as her internal resources allow her. At some point, she needs to head back to the ocean to replenish herself. And that's the way, that's the natural way that they've been doing it for probably millions of years. But yeah, so she may come back sometimes once or twice to visit before she leaves the pup for good.
Right, but she may be gone for hours or days between those visits?
Well, she's generally with the pup. They'll go swimming together. They'll just kind of do for the 6 weeks of while she's nursing. Near the end, it's usually the mom just leaves.
Really?
And if she's seen again near the pup, they don't interact very much. Sometimes she'll disappear for a couple hours and come back, but usually it's only once or twice. There are some other kind of unusual circumstances, but.
So, but then the young pup is basically left. He doesn't understand why mom has just taken off, and so he probably just hangs out on the beach for a while, waiting, figuring she'll be back.
Yeah, we do. You see the pup sticks around in the same area where it was weaned for a while, and then it starts exploring, and they're incredibly fat when they're weaned, and they use that fat. They're not very mobile, but as they kind of get thinner and get a little hungrier and get a little more agile, they're learning how to find their own food. But during that time, they're also probably looking for more, so they're often trying to find other seals. We find them sometimes trying to nurse from turtles in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, or they'll try to kind of find other seals, and that's a point where they're potentially vulnerable to getting in interactions with people.
Right, and this is one of the problems, and if at that age particularly they learn that people are okay to interact with, it's a sort of unhealthy habit, as it were.
Right, that's a time where the seal is trying to learn how to be a seal, and if they find people instead, and if those people encourage them to interact with them, because the young seals are curious and they're pretty cute at that age, then it can encourage the seal to decide, I'm going to hang out with people instead of other seals. And with a seal that's that endangered, we want them to be a seal. And
right. Plus, there's potential for rather negative consequences of their interactions with people, either people who would hurt them, or they might conceivably, perhaps accidentally, hurt people.
Exactly. So yes, it causes. We're worried about human safety. Seals, when they're small and it's sort of cute, as they get a little bit bigger, they're going to continue to want to play. For them, is potentially pretty dangerous for humans in the water. But also, we are very worried about that individual seal's safety. It doesn't know who's okay to approach, who's going to be nice to it, and who's going to potentially harm it. So it's putting it in danger as well.
So the take-home message here that you want people to do is basically, if you see a seal, great, let us know, but basically stay away from it.
Yeah, enjoy it from a distance. Not, you don't need to stay a half mile away, but just enjoy it from a respectful distance. They really can be kind of charismatic to watch if they're not sleeping, in which case they're just cute and sleeping. But to give a call, let us know. But to just let it be a wild seal. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, and actually, speaking of letting you know, you've got a phone number that you wanted me to put off. This 888-256-9840.
Yes.
Is a number for people to call in if you see a seal that is not already sort of roped off on the beach. By all means, call that number. Let those folks know. They will send a team to help take care of it and be sure that seal does not get harassed or bothered, and keep people away from it and all that.
Yeah, it's a 24-hour hotline for sightings, but also definitely call it if you have an encounter with a seal in the water. That helps us track the behaviors of seals that might be starting to be a problem, and we can keep an eye on them.
Right, and there was one of those just off of Maui quite recently.
Yep, just in the last week or two, there was a young female seal, RL06 was her tag numbers, we'd been getting reports of her through those numbers over a year of spear fishermen taking fish from them, snorkelers, and it started to get more and more physical, and again, that starts to put people and her both in danger.
Right, because seals play with one another very roughly.
Quite roughly.
Right, they bite and grab on and drag each other around, and when you've got a 200-pound seal or 400-pound
and she's only
seal,
a 2-year-old,
right?
And she's 200-ish.
And she decides to drag you down. It's potentially an unpleasant experience, to say the least.
Yeah, that's not something we want
absolutely.
to be dealing with.
Okay, well, that's very cool. So this is all good advice then, and so why do we think the seal populations are declining?
Well, It's sort of a tough story because we've got the main Hawaiian Islands where the seal population is increasing, but overall the population is declining. It's primarily driven by a pretty steep population decline in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, which is that graph that you showed just earlier. And so it's not a single silver bullet. It's a combination of issues. Some of them are legacy human issues of entanglement in marine debris, just an incredibly small population size causing skews in sex ratios where you've got then males that can't find a mate and are attacking younger seals or mobbing females. And then you've got some sort of natural ecological cycles that are kind of tied to the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and El Nino Southern Oscillation cycles, where right now we've been in just a bad place for Hawaiian monk seals in terms of ocean productivity recently. And so it could be bad for all the predators up there. We're just not sure. It's just been very bad for monk seals. And it's we've had very low juvenile survival in particular. Very few seals make it to reproductive age at around 5 or 6.
Okay. And so I think we've got a graphic that could show a bit more about that, if I'm not mistaken here. Our next graphic should be number 4, I think. But it's showing a change in population trend with the population decreasing on one hand and another population increasing, I think.
Yeah, so the main Hawaiian Islands population is that blue line on the bottom. And those are the seals in the inhabited Hawaiian Islands and Ni'ihau. And this is a projection based on the current population and the current population size and the demographics that we're expecting. The main Hawaiian Islands, the population is small, so it's increasing rather slowly. That red line is the bigger part of the Northwesterns, where the majority of the population is, that we're projecting if things keep going the way they are without something either ecological or without something else successful from recovery changing, they're headed. We expect it to potentially stabilize at some point, but when you're dealing with such small populations, what we call stochastic or unpredictable events could, when you're only talking a couple hundred individuals, you start to very much worry about disease outbreaks or just some really bad environmental issue happening and just unpredictably driving the population all the way down.
Sure, and we know that can happen even with much larger populations. So they were recently celebrating it was the 100th anniversary of the death of the last passenger pigeon. I was reading about that, and in a period of about 45 years, the passenger pigeons went from a population of multiple billions, where there were literally single flocks whose numbers were in the multiple billions.
Blackening the sky.
Darkening the sky for hours on end. And then they went to nothing in 45 years, which is really the blink of an eye for a population of that size. And so, certainly with only relatively a handful of individuals, it's dangerous. I think we have a sort of, in looking at this movement of seals between islands, so it's interesting to sort of track. One of the things you guys do is track you put tags basically on seals and track their movements in some cases with radio tags?
The research program uses satellite transmitters, which will transmit to the satellites through GPS. They'll also use what they call a cell phone tag, which was, I believe, developed out of University of St. Andrews, also with the help of the Navy here, to go through cell phone towers instead. And so it gives us GPS, but it also gives us depth that they're diving at, and time at depth, and all of these sort of other interesting parameters that let us understand sort of in 3 dimensions how deep they're diving, but also where they are.
How long is it? I think we have a little sort of an animated graphic of a sort of a map that shows some of this movement here.
So this is looking at a younger seal over the course of a couple months, but the idea here is to show that sometimes you might see the same seal on the beach, and you make the assumption it's the same seal, but you put a transmitter on them and you start tracking individuals, and you find that they're going pretty impressive distances, and that you could almost call them a sort of traditional fishing type strategy, where they are not really hitting the same place over and over, but they're spreading out their foraging effort over pretty large distances, which is really what you should be doing if your food source is kind of scattered. You don't wait in one place or try to hit the same place where you found something last time. You should just go cover as much area as possible.
Right. And so what is known about their diet? What do they eat? Presumably fish, but.
Yes, so presumably fish. So in terms of area, they're going to be foraging pretty much anywhere from when they hit the beach, but from when they hit the water, but most of it's going to be between 60 feet and 200 feet, though we have seals that are diving as deep as 600 feet, as deep as 1,500 feet is how deep they are known to dive. So they're covering, again, a lot of area, much deeper. Those tags, before they put those transmitters on them, scientists thought they were only diving, 30, 60 feet deep. That was where all the scientific papers said they went. They put those on and were really pretty stunned to see that they're actually spending quite a lot of time in that sort of 200 to 600 feet. And while they're out there, they're going along the bottom. So they're not looking at stuff up in the water column. If it's in the water column, or if it escapes up into the water column, they're generally not interested. If it goes to the bottom to hide, they want it, and it's only sort of things that are about the size of their face or smaller. So they're going for small fish, octopus, lobster, but a lot of smaller fish, triggerfish, some surgeon fish, sand lance, a lot of small fish that people aren't terribly interested in.
Okay. Well, that's great. So they're not really in competition with us.
They're in they definitely go after some of the same things that are, I would say, primarily targeted by spear fishermen. Some of them, it's probable that spear fishermen are going for different sizes and in different areas. Like, say with octopus, most people, I ask them where they catch octopus, and they say, usually maybe up to 30 feet, maybe up to 40 if the people are really good at it. Nearly all the octopus we've seen seals catch on video is 60 feet or deeper. So a lot of times we may be going after the same type of thing or type of fish, but there's sort of some geographical separation. Yeah.
Well, this is fascinating stuff. We're going to have to take a little break now. I'm Ethan Allen, your host on Likeable Science. With me today is Dr. Rachel Sprague, the Hawaiian monk seal recovery coordinator from NOAA, and we're going to be right back.
I'm Jay Fidel. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think it's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us.
Okay, it's every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll see you there.
And you're back on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. With me in the ThinkTech studios today is Dr. Rachel Sprague, the Hawaiian monk seal recovery coordinator for NOAA's Marine Fisheries Unit. We've been talking about the Hawaiian monk seals and the issues and challenges of monitoring a population of them. And I wanted to ask you, Rachel, so you shown earlier these estimates of that there's 1,100 monk seals or whatever. So how do you at NOAA know this? I mean, you can't just count the seal population. They're all over the place, underwater. It's a huge area. What kinds of techniques and methods do you use to get these population estimates?
Yeah, you know what, we actually, when it comes down to it, pretty much do count the individual seals. So it is somewhat unique in that we're doing, in most places, almost a direct census of the population. We tag pups when they're born, actually right after they wean, so we don't deal with them with the moms there. Put a little plastic tags on their hind flippers, and that gives them an ID for the rest of their life, a permanent ID that allows us to keep track of them. We do mark seals in other ways, sometimes, again, using very low-tech women's hair dye to bleach a number on their side. So that's usually for us or for other members of the public or people who might see them to be able to say, oh, I saw a big L6 on the side of a seal. They don't have to see those little tags, but it ends up being a lot of feet on the ground, very dedicated field scientists walking beaches in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands every single day in the summers to try to just identify every individual they can and tag new ones. So we probably got, somewhere in the 75, 80% of the population is individually identified. In the main Hawaiian Islands, a lot of the population numbers are coming from those reports from the public and through, again, really dedicated volunteers through the hotline.
So you just said in the summer you do this. Are the seals going somewhere else in the winter, or are they?
No, it ends up being that the environment in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands is very remote. We'll have camps of maybe 2 to 5 people living in tents on an island by themselves for several months at a time, and we've had the waves get very large, and you actually end up having difficulty getting in and out of those islands on small boats in the winter. So it's actually becomes sort of too dangerous to try to get up there in the winter.
I see. Okay. Yeah. You don't want to put your NOAA staff at risk.
Yes. Yeah. But we've been looking into some other technologies such as sort of unmanned aerial systems, UAVs, that we're currently sort of looking at how well those can pick up. But that's only giving you the seals on the beach. We're not sure if we'd be able to tell individual ID, which is ultimately kind of what we need if we want to continue our current method of assessing the population.
So you're looking at using drones to track seals. Huh?
Well, it's possible that there may be some interesting applications for those for wildlife, and so you can start out by running them over areas of beaches while you also have people on the ground, to be able to try to ground truth and see is what we think it's seeing actually what's true on the ground using the methods that we have sort of tried and true, and then potentially in the future, depending on funding or depending on, again, just like the logistics of nature, whether we're allowed into various areas, it might provide to be another tool. It's unlikely that it'll actually replace physical people on the ground.
And then another technique that you guys use, I know, is the whole seal cam.
Yes, that's critter cams that are. That is the brand through National Geographic is providing those critter cams. There's a seal with one. That's a whole. So it gets a whole package where it's a camera, a cell phone tag, so that we can tell where it is so we know what we're watching, and then we get a lot of other neat information. There's a 3D accelerometer attached onto there too, so essentially a gyroscope, so you can look at the kinematics of how many strokes they're taking and what orientation they are in the water. So we end up getting a huge amount of information from those.
Yeah, and it's great too, because and we have a video, I think, coming up here now of some footage that they took through one of these, and it's really stunning to sort of see the world from the seal's point of view, as it were.
Yeah. So.
Whoops! No, this is a different.
Oh,
video.
this is an intervention.
Right.
That,
okay. We'll go with this.
This is in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. You can see the water is beautiful, and this is those field camps that are up in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, walking the beaches and trying to track how many animals there are. They also often run into animals in trouble. So this is a seal that has gotten entangled in a big net ball. You think of those islands as being pristine and away from. Hundreds to thousands of miles away from people, but our effects still reach up there. And this is just, high seas drift net. Who knows where it came from? And that's a seal that almost certainly would have drowned had they not come upon her and been able to rescue her.
Wow, that's great.
Or him, not sure.
That's valuable work. I mean, you're saving seals' lives.
Yeah,
there.
so multiple, those camps are multiple use.
Yeah, well, excellent. So yeah, it looks like a lot of hands-on work here to do this.
It is. I mean, the Hawaiian monk seal recovery program is probably one of the most hands-on recovery programs of any marine mammal in the world. You're dealing with one of the most endangered marine mammals, and so every individual counts, in particular females. And so we do, intervene to try to save as many individual seals as we can, because they ultimately, your returns are greater when they if they can make it to have pups of their own.
Right, and you were saying that actually because of interventions, you sort of track this in some sense where...
Yeah, so we, again, since we can keep track of every individual seal for the most part, and we keep track of any events that happen over its life, and we can keep track of, was it entangled, was it being the victim of aggression from an adult male or that kind of thing where we intervened. And you can look at the accumulation of what seem like they're just kind of little, a couple here, a couple there. They're not terribly impressive. But when you put it together and look at animals that we helped and their daughters and granddaughters that they had, we're finding that up to 30% of the population today is alive because of those, what's, again, sort of seem like somewhat underwhelming interventions at the time, but they have really significant returns at the population level.
Well, no, that's super. I mean, that sort of... It must give you a good feeling to know that you really are making a difference then in the population here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So I know there's a perception though that these seals compete with us. You were saying that they really don't. They really tend to eat different sorts of things, and I think we have some. Graphics that show a little bit more about what they eat here and how much they eat?
Yeah, so the about 200 seals in the main Hawaiian Islands, one way of thinking about how much they eat, each individual seal probably eats about, maybe 2 to 4, 5% of their body mass a day. But sometimes that's, again, kind of hard to think about. And when you add up all the numbers, it sounds like, wow, they're still eating thousands of pounds of fish. But if you spread that out over kind of around the nearshore waters that are about, say, it's the 200 meters or less, the whole population of monk seals in the main islands is eating about 1 pound of fish per square mile in the nearshore waters around Hawaii.
Right, and considering how much fish there is, that's not a very big impact, right?
No, I mean, it's certainly some amount, but you also want to think about what the other marine consumers are eating. It's not just monk seals out there.
Right, and I think actually we have another graphic that shows, I think this, I'm not sure our viewers can see it.
Yeah, so the big purple, that's actually other apex predators like sharks and ulua are eating more than 50 times what monk seals are a day. And then monk seals are the circle, the orange one on the bottom, and then human commercial and recreational fisheries are those light blue and green circles. So those two together, we're estimating, are taking out of the ecosystem about 3 times as much as monk seals are eating. So not to say, the point here is just trying to think about things in context of that it's very tempting and easy. Everywhere marine mammals and fishermen in the, essentially in the history of humanity have interacted, there's been conflict. And it can be tempting to put a large portion of blame on that marine mammal, in this case monk seals. They're there, they're visible, they're easy, and sometimes it's easier or simpler to say that's a problem rather than thinking about the bigger picture, thinking about the fact that it is actually a food chain. There's energy that it's not like things that monk seals eat disappear from the ecosystem. They're actually, the energy's still there, and we also have an impact as well.
Right, and the sort of parallel to the situation in the Pacific Northwest with the sea lions and the salmon fishermen who get into ongoing conflicts about who owns the salmon.
Or the Northeast and
Right.
the harbor seals, or even again some of the large whales and the herring fisheries and that kind of thing.
Right,
It's really something we see all over.
And we just need to be sensitive to the fact that, again, we're sharing a relatively small planet with a lot of other animals, and they need to eat too. And we're probably already taking more than our share of the fish out of the ocean, right?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's impacts. There may be some, and there may be some conflicts, and it's worth narrowing to focus down on what those are, and to not sort of try to make big generalizations about what's going on, and to try to understand that in general things are a lot more complicated than we like to think they are.
Yes. Well, that's one of the great lessons of biology, isn't it?
It is.
Is that there aren't any sort of individual little units that stay by themselves.
Right.
Everything is
Because
tied
the
in.
human fisheries are targeted fairly specifically on certain kinds of fish. Most marine mammals are eating very broadly across the ecosystem, so their impacts are often much more spread out, even though, again, we kind of like to focus on the things that we overlap with them, but that they may be eating something that we want, but they may also be eating a predator or a food source of a different fish that we want that they may not even be eating. And so it's again, food chains are often webs are complex.
Right, right. The classic kelp, sea otter, sea urchin dynamics.
Yes, there's a lot of indirect effects that are going on that usually those, a seal eats this and we eat this, so we're in competition. That doesn't quite capture the situation.
Right, exactly. It's our great tendency to want to simplify things. Well, this is excellent. We're going to take another little break here in a moment. You're with us on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. With me today in the ThinkTech studios is Dr. Rachel Sprague, the Hawaiian monk seal recovery coordinator for NOAA Marine Fisheries. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Yamashita, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And Urban Transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Good afternoon. You're back here on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, broadcasting here from the ThinkTech studios. With me today in the studio is Dr. Rachel Sprague, the Hawaiian monk seal recovery coordinator for NOAA's Marine Fisheries Unit. We're talking about the Hawaiian monk seals, looking at their lives, their populations, their interactions with people, and all these related aspects of the monk seals. And we were talking about some of NOAA's efforts to help recover the populations, monitor the populations, help us understand a little better what the roles of these animals are in the ecosystem and how we and they are not necessarily, in a deep sense, in any direct competition. Perhaps we have areas where we're exploiting the same resources, but so can you tell us a little more about some of this stuff? How you see the seals playing a vital role in the ecosystems?
Yeah, so you're right, we do a lot of interventions from disentangling seals, deworming young seals in the Northwesterns that are nutritionally stressed to try to take away the additional stress of intestinal parasites that all wild animals pretty much carry, to more direct interventions in the main Hawaiian Islands if there are seals that have swallowed or have gotten a hook embedded somewhere on their face, to remove those and potentially save their lives. It is a case where actual science and trying to understand what they do, I think can actually help reduce the conflict. Say with those critter cams, where that's helping us understand maybe what some of the differences are of foraging in the main Hawaiian Islands versus the Northwesterns. It could help us understand why the juveniles have such different survival and such different ability to find food. But also those critter cams give us a kind of a window into seals' lives, and it's something that it's very accessible and that it's science that people can see and can also make their own judgments of. And so it's not just a scientist telling someone, hey, the competition with seals isn't as bad as you think, but it actually lets them see for themselves something that they would never otherwise be able to see.
Right. They do give you a real insight into what the ocean is like, what the seal's real environment looks like, the kinds and numbers and varieties of fish that are there, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, we seem to have misplaced our video of that. But so what do you find that the big barriers to this work that you do? What are your big challenges?
In the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands, again, where the majority of the population is, the challenges are primarily logistical, where it's difficult to get there. It's several days by ship. There are few of those islands have piers or anything to speak of, so you can come in a large ship, but then you've got to move hundreds of buckets of supplies onto the island in small boats. You're dealing with weather, waves, all of that kind of thing, and cost, where it can be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to get ships to go up there on several week excursions. In the main Hawaiian Islands, you've got people, and so again in the Northwesterns, it's primarily these sort of other threats, but we can work to either mitigate them or remove them if possible. Main Hawaiian Islands, you lose a lot of the control over the threats when the threats are, potential for encountering domestic animals or even other marine animals, and the potential for disease to come into the population that maybe seals haven't really been exposed to, or the monk seals, because they've been isolated for so long out here in the middle of the ocean. And then those behavioral issues that we talked about, where we can't control what everyone chooses to do on the beach, and when people make kind of a bad choice to feed a seal or to encourage a seal, it's other people who end up kind of taking the initial brunt of that bad decision by their personal safety in the water is now at risk, and then ultimately we end up having to make a management decision to move that seal, which is not something you want to be doing.
Right, right. Because again, these seals, you see them basking on the sand and they look like they're incredibly slow, but when they get in the water, they're incredibly fast, powerful swimmers with tremendous capabilities of moving to great depth, staying down for long periods of time, very maneuverable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the main Hawaiian Islands, it has been a challenge, and it's, I think it's a great opportunity, and it's one where I think it's starting to grow, where there's different community groups. It's not all about monk seals, but it's seeing monk seals as part of a marine ecosystem. It's, being responsible around seals isn't just about the seals, it's about just being responsible and safe around other animals in the ocean. Spear fishermen, for instance, are also dealing with sharks or puhi, the eels. There's quite a lot of things that can bite, and so they're trying to make safe choices about how to keep themselves safe in the water. People on the beaches, and just sort of coastal stewardship in general is, again, if you're treating monk seals as another animal in Hawaii that's special, it's native, it's something to be respected, and I think that's where community groups and other organizations are, I think, starting to step up and saying, hey, this is something, you don't have to love monk seals or adore them, or but this is something that is important to us in Hawaii.
Right. Well, that's wonderful, because they then, yes, they become potentially a sort of a draw, as it were, for people. They're more regarded as a resource than a hindrance or a threat or an inconvenience.
Yeah, and it's always wanting to balance that, because again, with people wanting to see them, you run the risk of people encouraging them to come, and then that again can hurt the people who live here and who rely on the ocean for subsistence or for recreation. And so we're wanting to do that balance between people being able to enjoy them and to see them and to have sort of a special wildlife interaction, but to not have that extend into places where it's hurting the residents and the people who live here.
Exactly. And I mean, all wildlife, we're sort of struggling with that balance all the time.
Yeah.
You want them around, but you don't want them to become a pest species in any sense. So that's quite the balancing act sometimes. So do you feel like your work is being successful? I mean, it seems like you have these, you and your colleagues have done these interventions that you can sort of track now and say it's really has had some significant impacts on the population.
Yeah, yes. So I think we've had over 30 years of experience as a program, coming up with figuring out what types of interventions work, what areas that we potentially should look into more. We just got a new permit. That's an Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act permit, which is what allows us to do the research on seals that will give us expanded abilities to look into vaccinations, again, use deworming as a management tool, not just doing research into whether it helps survival. It'll allow us to potentially come up with tools to deal better with human monk seal interactions and to try to discourage manage seals, to discourage them from trying to hang out with people. So yeah, I think the program itself is moving forward. The use of of new technology, of critter cam UAVs, lots of new and interesting looking at energetics and metabolism of seals and how much energy really are they using, and is that what's causing some of the problems with juvenile survival?
Right. Yeah. Clearly, that whole area can get into some very very deep sort of physiology because the water is cold. It's draining body heat away. This is, of course, you were saying at the start. This is why the seals are they're basking. They're sort of trying to save energy, get themselves warm again, basically, so they can go back out. And, yeah, and that. So it sounds like quite a bit of a lot of deep science and also very complex interactions with larger parts of the system, the human parts of the system. So great. Well, this is very commendable that you're doing this. Are there sort of next big things on your agenda to try to fix?
Well, like I said, the new permit is one of the things that I think will allow us to move forward. It's potentially trying to come up with some new tools that would be valuable. A lot of it right now is using tools that we've come up with and trying to use them in smarter and more efficient ways, or take things that were developed through research and actually try to use them as management tools, and really to try to move more into that realm of working with communities and partners, because again, NOAA is very much of a science agency, and that's been the history, and that's where I think a lot of people are comfortable. But really, in order to get to a place where monk seals can recover, at least in the main Hawaiian Islands, to have that population kind of contribute to the recovery of the whole, it needs to be beyond just NOAA wanting the species to be recovered. It needs to be something that's driven by communities and by people.
Right, and therefore, of course, you need to have the communities knowing about the seals, understanding at least some of the basics of what these animals are, what they do, why they're important, why they're valuable, so that people will then take the necessary steps to protect them, be sure they're not harassed, report them to you when they are either behaving inappropriately or when they see them and they haven't yet been noted.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so there's always going to be disagreements, and again, it's something you see around the world. There's disagreements about how to manage wildlife, and that's often when I talk about being a wildlife biologist, and people are like, "Oh, you get to work with wildlife," and a lot of times it's no, I work with human-wildlife conflict. But even there, it's fairly rare that I deal with direct conflict between humans and wildlife. It's more likely that it's going to be dealing with different groups of humans in conflict about wildlife.
Right. Right, the humans are probably far more dangerous to you in that sense.
Well, and again, it's the successful recovery of the seals is partially about what we can do with the seals themselves, but a lot of it is how we can reconcile or come to places where we don't necessarily have to agree on everything between different groups of people that have different ideas, and you don't have to. It's not my goal to get everybody to love seals, but it is my goal to get to a place where we can at least talk about the problems, have people say what the problems are rather than lashing out at the seals themselves.
Right. In the again, in the Pacific Northwest, where I spent a number of years, some of the marinas essentially gave over individual floating docks to the sea lions, basically, and just sort of said, "That's now the seals' dock. People are not going to go on that dock anymore." And it was sort of a compromise. There are people who wanted to get rid of the sea lions entirely and get them gone, and of course, the sea lions would prefer to take over the whole area. And so you have to find those balances somewhere, right?
Yes, and to assuage people's fears, we're not going to see that, or the Pier 39, I think, in San Francisco. There are more seals or sea lions on that dock than there are in the entire main Hawaiian Islands. And monk seals, they're kind of interesting. They have just an entirely different ecology from those colonial seals that people are used to seeing on the West Coast, where they are somewhat social, but they really do, they come up on the beach in ones, maybe in twos. They obviously socialize with each other, and they've got their little dominance hierarchies and the seals that they like to hang out with more frequently than others. But I think it's a good thing for our ability to look forward to the future and to manage them, that I think that we're not going to be looking at entire beaches taken over by seals, which is hopefully is a bright.
Yeah, that could lead to even greater conflicts for sure. Yes, if you suddenly had 200 seals decided to move in front of the Hilton,
Yeah,
that would
we will not be looking at that.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. So this is great. It's wonderful to learn more about your work here, and I applaud you for doing this valuable service to both to the seals and for the population of Hawaii and population of the Earth as a whole too. It's great that people are doing this and that you and your colleagues are being so successful at it and can know so much about these animals already, which are very hard to follow and to track, and are learning more all the time and being able to better and better protect them. So it's absolutely wonderful to have that kind of activity going on and to learn about it. And I very much appreciate your coming on board here to tell me about it and inform our guests and viewers about your work. Thank you so much, Rachel. Again, you've been watching Likeable Science. With me today in the studio has been Dr. Rachel Sprague, the NOAA's Hawaiian monk seal recovery coordinator. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, and I'll see you again. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.